Hello, and welcome to session 10 of this video series on Learning the Portable Stimulus Standard, or PSS. I'm Tom Fitzpatrick, CEO of Big Fish EDA Consulting, on behalf of the Accellera Systems Initiative and my fellow members of the Portable Stimulus Working Group. In this session on PSS Randomization and Inferencing, we'll see how randomizing a PSS model can generate multiple scenarios and how the solver can also infer additional actions to both satisfy constraints and meet data flow requirements. Let's get started. As noted in session 5, a PSS model declaratively describes your verification intent and the rules the solver needs to generate legal scenarios. The model compiles into an intermediate format that identifies the holes to fill, such as constraints to solve or data flow requirements to meet. The solve platform solves those constraints, fills the random fields, schedules them, and infers any actions needed for data flow. The code generator builds a concrete implementation from the atomic actions following the activity schedule. And the runtime engine executes it against your DUT. So let's look at how constraints shape the scenario. The solver infers any traversals needed to make it legal. So here we traverse xfer and then get m with a buffer between them. So the solver must decide who will provide the buffer input to xfer. Put small outputs a compatible buffer with size under 40, matching get m. And put large also outputs a compatible buffer, but constrains the size differently. So the solver may infer either put, and the buffer size depends on which one it chooses. Adding an inline constraint limiting the size to under 32 rules out put large because its size is now incompatible, leaving put small as the only option. But another xfer traversal could also supply the buffer, and this would require its own input in turn. Now suppose we want to prevent the solver from inferring another xfer a traversal. We can add a step field to xbuff constrained to 0 from both puts and force the getM input step to 1. Then we set xfer's output step to its input step plus 1, and now another xfer can't be inferred, since that would make xfer's output step at least 2, which would violate C2. The step field is just a modeling artifact limiting the solution space. It doesn't represent anything in the DUT. Also, test A constrains only explicitly traversed instances. Every constraint must hold, so an action with conflicting constraints can't be inferred. Now let's see what happens when we modify constraint C2 to set the getM input buffer step to 2. That forces the explicit xfer's output step to 2, so its input step must be 1, and only another xfer can supply a buffer with a step 1, so the solver infers that traversal. We then infer one more traversal to feed that xfer, where the step must be 0, so we infer put small. Since size is still under 32, put large still can't be inferred. Random fields are randomized when their action is traversed. The look A action has a random 4-bit field ranging from 0 to 15, but the value isn't set until look is traversed in the entry A activity. The sub action traverses look twice in its own activity, so both look instances are traversed, and their val fields also default to 0 through 15. Adding a constraint in sub A makes the solver leave headroom, so LA.val becomes 0 to 14, and LB.val becomes 1 to 15. Constraint C2 spans actions, so the solver picks look.val in 2 to 15 to keep the later subfields legal, capping lb.val at 14 and la.val at 13, with minimums of 1 and 0. So even though sub isn't randomized until after look, the solver must look ahead to sub to know all the constraints that will affect the values it can use to generate the look.val field. This look ahead also applies to inferred actions that get traversed in the activity. There are two important hooks in the solving process, the pre-solve and post-solve exec blocks. Pre-solve blocks run just before constraint solving. In pre-solve, we can set non-ran fields for the solver to use as inputs. We can also read other non-ran fields, but we can't access action handles here since they aren't set until solving finishes. And reading a ran field returns only its default value since solving hasn't happened. The post-solve block runs after the solver resolves all ran fields, and this lets us set non-ran fields from the randomized results, or assign values that the solver won't touch. Pre- and post-solve evaluation follows the scenario schedule, so here the blocks run for A first, then B, and then C. Within a compound action, the order is top-down, the parent before its children, so D follows B, and then E and F. For data flow, the producer runs before the flow object, which runs before the consumer, so the buffer follows D, and F follows the buffer. The same holds for streams. So although E and F are traversed in parallel, their blocks run E, then the stream, and then F. For resources, the resource runs before any claiming action, so R precedes E, and its order relative to A, B, and D is undetermined. Here's a common use model for post-solve blocks. Our PSS top component includes a buffer and an action, and the buffer has a random size field and a non-random data field holding a list of 8-bit values. As in session 4, a list is a variable-sized ordered collection, like a system Verilog queue, and keeping it non-random greatly reduces the load on the solver. The put M action outputs the buffer, so its random fields are solved when the action is traversed. That randomization obeys the constraints, so the size lands between 64 and 127. After solving, the post-solve block uses the solved obuff.size as a repeat count, assigning a pseudo-random value to each data element. The data then travels through the buffer to other actions, helping check data consistency across the scenario. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I encourage you to watch the next video in this series on PSS memory allocation. Hope to see you there.